There are two things to remember if you want to own the kettlebell versus getting owned by it. And both of them are to do with the kettlebell's unique shape. Since the kettlebell, unlike a dumbbell, has its center of mass outside of your grip, it will try to rotate your arm and break your wrist as you're moving it around. So as you're moving the kettlebell or you're moving your body, in addition to actually lifting the weight, you constantly have to control the position of your wrist and the position of your shoulder. If you don't, you get owned by the kettlebell. If you do, then both your wrists and your shoulders become stronger and more stable. So the first thing is to make sure that whenever the kettlebell is in a lockout position, meaning it is on a straight arm, whether it is vertical or horizontal, to make sure that the kettlebell is not hanging over your face. If the kettlebell has rotated this way to the point where its butt is hanging over your face, it is halfway to owning you, because it has now started to dislocate your shoulder and there's only a short step away from bending your elbow. You don't want to allow that, because the whole purpose of training with a kettlebell is to not let it win. So your arm has to be externally rotated so that the kettlebell is either hanging on the outside of your arm or in a neutral position, but never over your face. Same thing applies to presses, snatches, jerks, and any other overhead position. What I see a lot of people do is they allow the kettlebell to rotate their arm into this position and then they wrestle with it at the top. That not only makes you weak and your shoulder unstable, but it can potentially lead to shoulder injuries. What you want to do instead is keep the kettlebell in check. As you go up, the kettlebell should be hanging behind you, not on the side of your head, like this. So behind your arm, or if you're doing Girivoy sport, to the side of your arm. Second principle of owning the kettlebell is very simple. It is not to allow the kettlebell to bend your wrist backwards. Since the kettlebell's center of mass is hanging outside of your hand, it will always try to bend your wrist backwards. If you have ever done arm wrestling, you know that if you have managed to bend the wrist of your opponent, you're halfway to winning the arm wrestling contest. It is the same thing with the kettlebell. If the kettlebell manages to bend your wrist backwards, you instantly become weaker, not only in your overhead lockout, but also in all pressing movements. So it is much more difficult to press this way rather than to press with your wrist straight. If you let your wrist be bent backwards by the kettlebell, not only will the kettlebell become more unstable in the overhead position, but also, and more importantly, you risk wrist injury, especially if you're landing into that position from a ballistic exercise. So what instead we do is we keep the kettlebell on the bottom of our palm so that the wrist remains completely straight and our knuckles are always pointing up. A very easy test for this position is look at your knuckles. If they're pointing backwards like this, then it's an incorrect position. You want your knuckles to be pointing up. So these two principles are very important in making sure that your kettlebell training is both effective and injury-free.